After yesterday's inaugural, we are starting with the main sessions today, and every day we will have, apart from Professor Nikulin, one or sometimes two speakers, and they will be discussing and talking about issues which are very diverse. Today I have decided to join Professor Nikulin, and we will be introducing Russia to you. I'm very sure most of you, in whatever discipline or capacity, must have read, heard about Russia. So you must be having your own understanding, image of Russia. But I suppose it is in the fitness of things that if there is a professor from Russia talking about Russia, there has to be, I wouldn't say a counterpoint, but another perspective. And I really don't know. We have not planned our Jugalbandi, so I don't know what it's going to be. But I request Professor Nikulin to start. But before that, maybe the first thing, I just had one sentence he told me what he's going to discuss. On the basis of that, I'll make a very short introduction. He said he's going to talk about the vast expanse of Russia, whatever that might mean. So whenever we talk about, whenever the image of Russia comes, the first thing that occurs, or whenever you ask even a school-going child, what is the first thing that occurs to mind, it is the sheer size. I mean, a country which occupies nearly 10% of the land mass, which is the largest country in the world, which spans 11 time zones, and 10 of these are contiguous. Only one, Kaliningrad, is apart. So there is France, which has 13 time zones, but it is spread across the globe because it has territories, colonies, former colonial territories. So Russia, with 10 contiguous time zones, 10% of the world's land area. And I often, when I introduce Russia to my Indian audience, I often say that in terms of territory, Russia is 5 times bigger than India. It's another matter to set the matter, or to set the record straight, that India is 10 times bigger than Russia in terms of population. So Russia 5 times bigger than India, and India 10 times bigger than Russia in terms of population. That gives some idea. I mean, if you talk about the geography, which perhaps he will be doing, all right, so he will tell you 1,000 lakes, and the biggest sweetwater lake with nearly quarter of the total, sweetwater around the globe. So there are so many fascinating facts about Russia. So the first introduction would be that. Then we will discuss something about what Russia is. Its identity, maybe something about its historical, cultural experience, which went into the making of Russia, and why Russia matters. So all these issues will be discussed today. I request Professor Nikulin to start the discussion, to give his presentation.
Thank you. Thank you, Professor Pandey, for this exactly in the introduction to my lecture. Hello, dear colleagues. I'm glad to be here again. My lecture consists from 3 parts. First, it's special, short, if you want, politologist introductions. I realized that, first of all, I'm among politologists, and I'm going to stress the meaning, some key politicians, some key political ideologies for Russian development. After that, we observed some information about the place of Russia in BRICS, the place of Russia in BRICS trade. And the third part about, yes, about Russian spaces, about organization of spaces, about contradictions, rural-urban contradictions, demographic contradictions. My first specialization, I am rural sociologist, and I'm going to demonstrate to you some passes of rural development for Russia. It's a key problem. I mean, for this big country, it's a main problem how to save, how to reorganize former rural areas. During our next lecture, we are going to talk about China-Russian trade relations, political relations, cultural relations, economic relations, also Brazilian relations. I will demonstrate some also examples from another branches of Russian economy, some mutual projects between Russia and BRICS countries. So, main ideologies of Russian development in the beginning of 20th century. And I suppose it's three representatives of these three ideologies passes of Russian development. First is Pyotr Stolypin, second Alexander Chiyanov, Vladimir Lenin. I'm going to say something about Stolypin and Chiyanov. I suppose that Mr. Lenin does need representation. Pyotr Stolypin was a very clever prime minister in Tsardom in the beginning of 20th century. He started radical agrarian reform, trying to split Russian traditional peasant commune and to establish new capitalistic order with development of capitalist farming. He also introduced some new ideas in sphere of self-government, but his main attempt was to save old Tsar order, but modernizing this order using some key elements of capitalist economy. He was killed in result of terrorist attack in 1911. Alexander Chiyanov, and you know, it's interesting, it's a very tragic story, this brilliant economist, sociologist. He was very prominent economist in 1920s. He was key expert for Soviet power in the period of new economic policy, NEP. But with starting of collectivization in the beginning of 1930s, he was repressed by Stalin because Chiyanov suggested another type of cooperative collectivization, and he was executed in 1937. He was a very famous popular figure in 1920s, but after his death, his name was forbidden and his intellectual heritage was forgotten. And it's interesting that it was unexpectedly reopened in India in 1960s. It was a detective story. Some British anthropologists visited India in 1960s, and they found that some Indian economist repeated the name of one, they supposed German scientist, Chayanov, because they mentioned that they read Chayanov books in the German language. Why German? In 1920s, some Indian students decided to be students of German universities in opposite of British style of intellectualism, and in Germany in 1920s they read Chayanov's books that were published in German language. As a result, British and Indian economists and anthropologists suppose that it was some German economist who wrote in German language in 1920s. when peasant studies started in 1960s, the name of Chiyanov was a key name for the development of peasant studies, and of course his works were translated into English and other languages. So the main idea of Chiyanov was how to transform traditional peasant society in modernity, using ideas of cooperativism, using idea of peasant solidarity in market economy, so-called the development of market-oriented cooperativism with some ideas solidarity. And frankly speaking, Chiyanov was marginal in the beginning of 20th century, and it's also a marginal figure in contemporary policy. Some people suppose that he wrote some utopia projects. And now I suppose that the main ideological course in contemporary Russia, of course, it's course of Pyotr Stolypin. And in a whole, I suppose it's the most popular figure in modern political life in Russia. So idea idea of some autonomy, idea of conservative development of a strong state that maintains some forms of state capitalism. Let's talk about Russia with BRICS relations. So you see that Russia is the sixth largest economy in the world by GDP PPP and has the world's territory and mineral reserves. You know, we have some anecdotes, some jokes that God gifted different nations different lands, and He presented for Italian, for example, Apennine Peninsula, and for Spain He presented Pyrenees Peninsula. And for Russia, he gifted its North Territory. And Russians prayed, it's not possible to live in this cold country. And God answered, okay, in this case, I gifted you a lot of mineral resources. So, and a lot of mineral resources and you need a lot of space. So, you see some statistics about dynamics of GDP of Russia in 2018-2022. $1 trillion, and some key characteristics of my country. So it's area more than 17 million square kilometers. Population, it's about 146 million people. It's 9th place in the world. Again, some characteristics of GDP. And also you see some main section of GDP of Russia in 2022. So percentage of service sector, oil and gas industry, manufacturing industries, mining, trade, constructions, and some other branches of economy. So in 2022, the volume of exports from Russia exceeded imports by almost 2.5 times and amounted to a record 59 billions. Again, now you see structure of exports from Russia in 2022. The main part of the export, of course, mineral fuels and metals, then fertilizer, also again some different metals, and 70% some other products. And you see a structure of imports to Russia in 2022. Main parts, chemical industry and mechanical, also some food products, and it's less other sectors of import. So the main specialization now, Russian specialization, is the export of natural resources. mainly than 80%, and oil about 68%. Concerning Russian imports, it's very diversified with chemical industry products leading in their structure, 21%. Food products and electronics, of course. Russia main trade partners in 2022 with China, Turkey, the Netherlands, Germany, and Belarus. Tomorrow we will discuss the features of China-Russian relations, but in any case, China is Russia's main foreign trade partner within the BRICS association, and you see structure of Russian exports to BRICS countries in 2022. You see the main share it's Chinese share. First of all, China 65%, India 23%, and after that other countries. This presentation was prepared when it was discussed participation of Saudi Arabia and Argentina in BRICS. So, but it doesn't matter. You see that first of all it's China, and after that India in exports. Concerning structure of Russia's import from BRICS countries in 2022, again, you see the leading meaning of China, then India. You know, this National Bank of Development in Russian NBR, it's special bank for development of BRICS. And you see the main direction for Russia in Russia, the NB finance projects to develop social and digital infrastructure, and also helps restore cultural heritage sites. So the main direction for financial support in Russia from this Bank of BRICS. So main projects also is social infrastructure, and the name project Affordable Housing and Urban Development Program, with some project goals supporting the initiatives of the Russian government to expand opportunities for Russian families to obtain housing within the framework of the implementation of the national project Housing and Urban Environment. Second direction, digital infrastructure. Now Russia has a lot of special program for digitalization of all sphere of social life and branches of economy. Project name, Project for Expansion of Cellular Network and Cloud Services. Project goal, modernization of cellular infrastructure through the installation of new cellular towers and the deployment of cloud services infrastructure for enterprises. And the third direction, multi-level project. Project name is the second stage of project for the development of small historical towns, restoration of cultural heritage sites, development of marketing and branding strategies for small historical town in Russia. Russia divided into three main parts. I mean, big cities, middle or small cities, and villages. So now we have special program for cultural development of middle and small towns. And Professor Sudhir Kumar visited two years ago one of our small towns, and we demonstrated him some cultural programs for development of historical heritage of this town. So it's the main characteristics, some basic characteristics of Russia inside BRICS and BRICS trade. But let's discuss now some the main characteristics of Russia as a huge and big country. You see political administrative division of Russia. It's about 84 subject of Russian Federation, and it exists some hierarchy of these territories. So usually so-called Russian territories has status of oblast. It's also exists special autonomous republics. These native population like Chechnya, for example, and other republics. Some of them from North Caucasus, republics of Volga region, and some republics like Sakha-Yakutia in Asia part, in Siberia, and special divisions like autonomous okrugs. It's very sophisticated composition of different type of administrative governing, and it exists a very strong centralization from Moscow for ruling these territories. Next map. You see that Russia is a multinational country, but this map demonstrates the percentage of Russian population in Russia. So you see that red color is where the Russian population is above more 80%, and where less, it's again, for example, republics of North Caucasus. Here some small Caucasian nations. Here also region Volga-Riva. It's some Turkish republic like Tatarstan, Bashkortostan, and also some territory of Siberia. Look at population density. By the way, concerning North characteristics of our countries, by the way, that we should remember that about 2/3 of our territory of Russia is the territory of permafrost. So it's a permafrost. It's about this long. So on the territory of permafrost, it's not possible to organize some agriculture. Because of very severe climate. And main part of the population concentrated on European part of Russia and the south of Siberia. So you see only some small fragments in far east territory of Russia. For example, here and there, Vladivostok, Khabarovsk. And it's the main problem for Russia, also this polarization of population between European part of Russia and Asia part of Russia. Inside these territories, we can see the process of concentration population, especially in big, large cities. Two main cities in Russia, of course, Moscow. It's about 15 million inhabitants. And the second, St. Petersburg, it's about 5 million inhabitants. After that, we can see 12 big cities where population is more than 1 million. Like, thank you. Like Kazan, Novosibirsk, Yekaterinburg, Krasnodar, and so on. And the main trend for this space division, concentrations of population, especially in large and big cities. And the population of other territories. We can find decrease of population in small towns and, of course, in countryside. The main problem for Russia is demographic problem. Mr. Putin was asked about the main problem for Russia and stressed the main problem is demographic problem. And you see birth and death in Russia during the second half of 20th century and the beginning of 20th century. You see that it's very gloomy situation where now it's picture demonstrated the declining of population in Russia since 2021 or earlier. Also the problem, fertility rate. You see the situation with statistic children per woman since middle of 19th century to the beginning of 21st century. It's typical situation for most European countries. But the European countries relatively very small in comparison with Russia, and also the main problem for Russia is the population of this big country. Now the third part of my presentation, rural-urban relations, and some paths of space development. Adam Smith and Karl Marx wrote that the rural-urban division of labor is a central problem of all political economy. And you see that in Russia the ratio of the rural and urban population has fluctuated at approximately the same level for about 20 years, about 73–75% urban population and 25–27% rural population. Now it's in modern states usually it's typical picture about 75% urban population, 25% rural population, and you can find this picture in many European countries, and I think in America and Canada too. And so in modern societies, about one quarter of population prefer to live in countryside. But among this 25% of rural population, only 6% are farmers, the people who works in agriculture. Other dwellers of the countryside, they are usually some representative of small business and some local officials, some workers of social infrastructure, and so on. You see the number of rural settlements in 2021 was 150,000 villages, but about 25,000 villages don't have a permanent population, so they were abandoned. And as a result, several people live in these villages, and only in summer and winter are the so-called dead villages. In a whole, the number of rural settlement in Russia decreased from 294,000 in 1959 to 153 in 2021. And the largest number of rural settlements without population and with number of inhabitants no more than 10 people. About 80% of all Russian villages without inhabitants, and most of them are located in the northern infertile regions of Russia. So you see that this demographic depopulation, Russian countryside, especially in the Russian North European part, and also in most regions. Only some region like Moscow suburb region or St. Petersburg region, and also South Republics of Caucasus and some Siberia region where a lot of gas and oil have more sustainable demographic situation. Also, its comparative structure of rural and urban population by age and gender. You see rural population and urban population, and the share of male and female in Russian countryside and in Russian cities. And also some demographic characteristics of working age and youngest working age. So the main problem, especially for rural territories, is demographic depopulation. In many villages we can find also some old people, and sometimes their sons alcoholics. It's typical situation, especially for the north and central part of Russia. More active population prefer to concentrate in big cities. Concerning agrarian production, we can see that Russia has some three-angle structure of different types of agrarian enterprises. You see, in 1990s, it was the year before the collapse of the Soviet Union, and the main role in Russian agriculture played, of course, big socialist enterprises, so-called kolkhozes and sovkhozes, collective farms and state farms. Their share was about 70%. And about 30%, it was a share so-called small plots of rural dwellers for subsistence, for self-consumption. In period of market reforming, it was strong crisis for big socialist enterprises, and their share in agrarian productions reduced about 50%, and it was period of self-support, self-farming, using small plots for family plots, not only for rural dwellers, but in many cases for urban dwellers. And you see this line. It was new post-Soviet sector of agricultural economy. It was growth of new farmers. So it was a Stolypin idea to introduce a new market-oriented farmers, but their share was so small in 1995. You can see the dynamics between these three main agricultural branches of economy. So after crisis of 1990s, it's new growth of big enterprises. But if in Soviet period it was so-called socialist collective farm, in the beginning of 21st century, you see the growth of agrarian capitalist enterprises, and many of kolkhozes and sovkhozes were privatized local elites. And now I think Russia is a champion in constructing of big agrarian corporation. And this is leading sector of Russian agrarian economy. You see also the growth of farmer production and declining of subsistence small economy. It's very discussable question, I think, in any countries and in India too. What is more effective, more progressive, big or small, large or small agrarian production? I think the situation is more sophisticated, and sometimes large agrarian production is more effective. It depends on branches. First of all, for example, of course, for example, in production of grain in Russia, of course, we can see domination of big agrarian enterprises, for example, in Celina steppe, in Volga region, and so on. But in some cases, more effective small farm economy, for example, in growing of berries. But in any case, now we can see the expansion of big agro-holdings. Agro-holdings is the name of big agrarian corporations in Russia. They use powerful financial support from central government. use newest equipment, machinery, digitalization. As a result, last decade it was agrarian revolution and agrarian production in Russia, and Russia now exports a lot of agrarian production, especially wheat. Russia now is champion in export of wheat in the world last 3-4 years. Here I demonstrate the power of the biggest agrarian corporation in Russia. It's you see this cultivated land by top 5 Russian agro-holding companies in hectares. The names of these big agrarian corporations: Prodimpex, Miratorgs, Agrocomplex, Rusagro, Volgodon, Agroinvest. So this company concentrated in their hand about 1 million hectares of land. In a whole now in Russian agriculture we can see domination of about 700 big agro-holdings. And also very discussable question about interrelations between agrarian production and rural development. We can see in Russian agrarian evolution some paradox, where we can see expansion of big agrarian corporation, we can see the declining of any rural life. I mean that big agrarian corporation use high productivity with their machinery, equipment, and so on. As a result, the growing of local unemployment, people migrated in the cities, and local rural life is dying. And many politicians insisted that the state obligates to maintain also farmers and in a whole local rural communities and protect them from expansion of agro-holdings. Concerning agrarian production in Russia, you see again regional production of grain. It's possible effectively to produce grain only in some south regions of Russia, so-called Black Chernozem region, and also some steppe region of North Caucasus, and also region of South Siberia, so-called regions of Selena. Here it's top 10 regions, champions in production of grain. Here regional production livestock and poultry also, especially in the center of part of Russia, and by the way in St. Petersburg region, because it's a big city agglomeration. You see that also in agriculture we can see this process of polarization. The richest region is getting more richer and richer, and in other territories have strong agrarian crisis and demographic crisis. Regional production of milk, also the similar picture with leading some south region of Russia. Let's look at the problem of rural Russia and sustainability. Some characteristics of sustainable agriculture. First of all, Russia remains wedded to an industrialized agricultural model. So its main characteristic of industrial agriculture, production is capital intensive, dependent upon the extensive use of machinery and mechanized equipment, a heavy user of various chemicals, pesticides, and herbicides. Industrial agriculture employs tens of millions of people up and down the food production chain and provides food security for the nation. departure from the industrial agricultural model would be politically and economically unpalatable. We have also some phenomenon green shoots in sustainable agriculture. Several forms of sustainable small-scale agriculture: manual labor, small plots of land, the use of organic fertilizer. Each entails non-commercial activity, and production tends to be self-consumed, so any contribution to food security is local. Now this green economy in organic farming is new fashion, very popular idea, especially among upper middle classes, and now this sector of agrarian economy is developing. And I'll give you example, some greenhouses or teplitsa. It's especially for self-consumption. People prefer in their small plots this type of agrarian economy. Greenhouses, teplitsa used on household plots and dachas are low-tech and comprise a type of green agriculture that has existed for a long time. These teplitsa often consist of nothing more than some plastic around and wooden frame that may be disassembled when the growing season is over. Teplitsa operators grow different vegetables that are usually self-consumed. Is very popular in Russia dacha mode of living or dacha style of living. You see in so big countries a lot of spaces for opportunities for urban dwellers to have small plots in countryside, and this to date from the Soviet period. The traditional dacha consists of wooden house and some land surrounding the house. The land plot is smaller than for личное подсобное хозяйство. How translated into English, personal subsistence economy. It was official title of this type economy in Soviet time. Dachas are used primarily for recreation by the urban population. Dacha uses seasonal and food production doesn't have a significant impact on the household economy, but in any case, about 1/3 of all families, urban families in Russia have own dacha plots. This is relatively poor dacha house from Soviet period. Now we have the strong differentiation. Some dachas oligarchs and dachas very poor people, but in any case it's a very popular style of life, and Russia is champion in this mode of living, partly in urban area, partly in countryside. As I know, after Russians, it's also dacha living is very popular among some Scandinavian countries, especially in Sweden and Finland. And also among Russian rural workers who works in agro holdings, it's also very popular so-called садоводство и огородничество, to grow in садоводство fruits and vegetables, in огородничество only vegetables. And for both, the size of the land plot is very small, labor is manual, organic fertilizer is commonly used, and production is intended mainly for self-consumption, so the contribution to food security is localized. It's some variant of food security on personal country family level. Again, some features, some key characteristics of organic farming. Growth in this sector is expected to be robust, but headwinds must be addressed. First problem, legislation is needed that regulates certification and standards for organic food. Now, we have strong discussion in Russia what is organic food, what is non-organic food, how it's possible, qualified it, and in law, and so on and so on. The second problem, retail prices for organic food is too expensive for the average middle class consumer, and of course some regionality of demand. And in any case, the city of Moscow accounts for 80% of national demand for organic food, and of course Moscow is the biggest consumption of organic food in Russia. We have special federal policy toward genetically modified food. And in July 2016, President Putin signed a federal law that prohibits the cultivation of genetically modified crops or the raising of genetically modified livestock. The only exception is genetically modified organism used in scientific research in a scientific laboratory. But genetically modified food is banned, and prohibition that affects whatever negligible Western food still found on shelves in Russian stores. And you see these photos, there's some demonstrations against genetically modified food. It's also very popular, is very discussable political question in Russia. In a whole, the main problem, the most discussable question, what is sustainable village? And we can see some household initiative from below. Russia's problem is that sustainability of rural communities has been affected by long-term inadequate rural development, resulting in depopulation and so-called black holes in the non-black Earth countryside, a term referring to an archipelago of population points between vast empty spaces with extremely low population density. It exists especially the program for the development of sustainable rural communities in Russia, operated in 2014-2025. These programs try to prevent the growth of the population of rural regions in Russia. Program goals for sustainable communities receive much less financial support than food production. You see the main direction of household initiatives, diversified income strategies, agro-tourism, and the emergence of so-called eco-villages. Eco-village is the newest type of rurality in Russia. I think the fashion of eco-village is from Europe first of all. But in any case, now Russia has about, of course, it's some statistical mistake for so-called big country like Russia. We have now about 400 eco-villages. And these eco-villages usually are founded by, romantic city intelligentsia, in many cases young generation from I don't know, from IT technologies, from creative classes, who try to organize new ecological life, and its idea is very popular. As a result, you see that now Russia have about 400 eco-villages, but it's much more than all eco-villages in European Union. But again, it's some new romantic idealist ideology, especially for young, rich, creative classes in contemporary Russia. As a rural sociologist, sometime I visited the eco-villages, and interesting to compare inhabitants of these eco-villages. One of the most famous eco-village, it's located about 150 kilometers from Moscow. It's about 150 households, and we organized some social survey asking about professions of inhabitants of this village. and most of them were IT specialists, and after IT specialists, a lot of musicians. So it's an interesting experiment for new rurality in 21st century. In a whole, rural development of Russia, what it's now, and finally I tried to collect the main drivers of rural development of Russia. Drivers from above and from below. From above, of course, it's Ministry of Agriculture. This ministry was constructed in the period of first year plan. And you know, from airplane or from helicopter, you can see that this building has form of tractor. So it's a symbol of new Soviet modernization. And of course, Ministry of Agriculture is very powerful organization, very bureaucratic organization. And first of all, Ministry of Agriculture tried to push some big infrastructure project to maintain big agrarian corporations. And it exists some close union between Ministry of Agriculture and agribusiness. You see a huge milk agro corporation. The title of this agro corporation, Ekoniva. It was established like Russian-German enterprises with high productivity in milk production. Concerning initiative from below, of course, first of all, it's task for rural municipalities. You see rural municipality in the north of Russia and rural municipality in the south of Russia with some representatives of rural municipalities. But unfortunately, Russia is so centralized country that rural municipalities can't have own budget resources, and in many cases they have deficit of budget. As a result, most of rural municipalities depends on high level of state hierarchy from oblast, republics, and Moscow. And we have a lot of some social initiatives, so-called participatory activists, some spontaneous unions between rural and urban dwellers try to develop, reconstruct countryside. Russian government also tried to maintain these participatory activists. They established some system of grants for this type of rural activism, maintaining these social initiatives from below. For example, to construct small bridge or to reconstruct a rural road, and so on and so on. Of course, it's good decision, but it's a small local and non-systematical development of Russian countryside. So that's all. Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Professor Nikulin, for giving an introduction about Russia and facts normally which we do not know or realize. He is an agricultural economist, so you can understand the type of agricultural development or local initiatives he discussed in detail. Perhaps during the COVID times, all of us got to know that Russia is the largest grain producer, the largest wheat exporter at least, and among the largest grain producers. So apart from being the largest supplier of oil and gas, Russia is also largest supplier of wheat and some other food grains. So whether it is energy security or food security, Russia has a critical role to play in global economy. Russia is interesting. We have Professor Dhruv Rana sitting. I don't know what I should say about Russia that may be of interest to him. He's a philosopher and historian of science. The only thing I can remember about Russia, in fact, there are quite a lot of scientific discoveries which were made in Russia. The most important, of course, is the periodic table, the Mendeleev table. And it's not just that the table was discovered in Russia. I believe some of you would know, those who are preparing for competitive exams, that the last element on the periodic table was in fact discovered in Russia, was rather created in Russia, ognasium or some such element, and which is the periodic number is 118, and it is the only element which is named after a living human. That scientist still is there. And not just that, contrary to what many of us think, there has been scientific collaboration between Russia and the US, and this is a result of one such collaboration, apart from the International Space Station. Talking about some other scientific discoveries, you know how the first space craft was Sputnik, was built in Russia, 1957. The first living creature, animal, was sent by Russia. The first human in this space was sent by Russia. And if you start counting, there are many such scientific discoveries. Russia has a very rich tradition of science. In fact, the Russian Academy of Sciences, at least its initial form, was created, I suppose, around the time when Peter the Great died. And so for 300 years, the Russian Academy of Sciences has existed. It has more than 3,500 institutions, 4,000 institutions under it. In 1925, in fact, 100 years from today, it was renamed as Russian Academy of Sciences, although it has existed for a much longer period, for nearly 3 decades. So Russia's, and in terms of military technology, ICBMs were discovered by Russia. AK-47 and many such other weapons are Russian discoveries. Russia is the only country which can even now challenge US militarily in terms of nuclear technology, missile technology, space technology. So these are some of the reasons, apart from many others, for which one perhaps needs to know about Russia. And I will be talking about something because I am a politologist, political scientist. So how and in what ways Russia is important for a political scientist, and also for a student of international relations, and maybe someone who is interested in issues of identity and culture. The most famous quote about Russia is attributed to Churchill. Sometimes during the Second World War, he once said that Russia is a riddle which is wrapped in a mystery inside an enigma. A riddle, mystery, and enigma. These 3 words he used about Russia. So what Russia is, one has to understand in order to make sense of what Russia is doing today. We know about Russia in the last few years, the Ukraine war, and how Russia has on various international fora and in various international and regional disputes, it has opposed the Western or the US position, is one reason why we often know about Russia. But what explains that opposition? What has been Russia's ties and relations with US and the collective West? I thought you have
Sorry to interrupt. First, we can have Q&A.
Q&A.
Yes. I think
All
students
right.
may have some questions quickly, and then your lecture, and then again one Q&A.
When Q&A. All right.
Sorry.
That no, it's all right. We can have that. So I interrupt my introduction about Russia, and I'll allow the participants to ask questions, because it's very logical. What he was discussing is also about Russia, but something which is very different from what I'm going to discuss. So it is only logical that we should take a few questions about Russia and about Professor Nikulin's presentation today. All right, so yes, please.
Thank you so much, sir. Thank you, sir, for giving
You
us-
can identify, tell your name and affiliation, a crisp one.
All right. So this is Nivalika Singh. My pronoun is she, her, they, and I'm from Iowa. So my question that you have, it's not a question, I would say, it's a curiosity. So the point that you have just started from the theoretical underpinning of Russia, what the Russia is, and how. So my question, I'm coming to the question. So why the migration is taking place from rural areas to urban areas? So this is a kind of a curiosity in my mind as an Indian, that it would be employment. What are the other factors? My second question is that why this the enterprise is playing, agriculture enterprise is playing a crucial role in Russia? Why there's a whole gamut of, I would say, more corporations? And when you given a slide, there was a slide that how the rate of farmers are increasing. Why the rates are increasing, proportion of this, like in 1990 there was no farmers were there when the Soviet Union there, and then after 1995 in your second graph, this slide. So in this small proportion of ratio of farmers are there, then there's the highest. So why the peak is increasing, gradual increase or drastic increase, you can say that. And then if the last point, I'm sorry, I'm really sorry. So I'm a geographer by profession. So how the eco-farming, that you said that eco-farming is a European culture or European buzzword which arrived from there. So why eco-farming? How is taking place in Russia? So this is a kind of a curiosity. Don't take it as a question. It's a curiosity question.
Thank you for your question. Firstly, I think it's a world tendency, this migration from countryside to the city. First of all, it's economic reason. Usually, modern cities can provide more salaries than countryside, and in many regions of Russia, it's typical picture: rural unemployment, low salaries in countryside. As a result, the migration of active population to the cities. Concerning agro holding, big enterprises in Russia, you see, 100 years ago, Russia was a great peasant country, and of course, inside Russia, it was possible to find some big landlords or capitalistic enterprises, but in a whole, it was the country of small peasants' households, like in India or China, but in the result of this Stalin's collectivization, it was introduced as a typical form for Russia agriculture, the type of big industrial farm. So since 1930s, the state maintain, first of all, the growth big agrarian enterprises. And after collapse of Soviet Union, after some short crisis for this type of agrarian production in 1990s, the state maintained again, and big financial capital from cities maintained this privatized ownership of socialist big agrarian enterprises. And now this is dominate again this idea form of agrarian enterprises. Concerning family farmers economies, in many cases during 19th, 20th centuries, it was the process of so-called depeasantization of Russian agriculture, Russian countrysides. People in countryside lost their peasant traditional abilities, and it was not so easy to organize new peasantry. Of course, now we see the growth of farm production, but not the growth of farms. As I remember, in 1990s, it was the biggest figure of Russian farms. It was 200,000 farms in Russia. And now we have only about 100 farms in Russia after 25 years later. But among farmers, we can see also the processes of capitalist differentiation. I mean, the growth especially of big farmers, and declining of small farmers in Russian economy. So this growth of farm production, first of all, it's the growth of big capitalist farmers in Russia. Concerning this idea of eco-villages, of course, it's discussable question who invented this idea of eco-villages. We can different approaches. For example, in Russia, it's very popular idea of Russian journalist. His name Megre. He is mysterious person. He wrote some small brochures about himself like a visionary, and in his brochures he visited some Siberian forests, and he met one mysterious woman. Her name was Anastasia, like one princess from Tsardom, and she explained him how it's possible to organize organic eco-village and so on and so on. I tried to read these brochures. I read it, and for me, it's very strange literature. I think personally skeptically about this mysterious literature. But many young people, very educated, very inspired this type of literature, these approaches that was presented in these brochures. As a result, for example, when a sociologist get interview with one member of this eco-village, he was, by the way, he graduated mechanical mathematical faculty of Moscow State University. It's one of the famous faculty in Moscow and in the world, I suppose, very strong faculty. And this person with very rational thinking. And when I critically mentioned about this brochure, he forbidden me to criticize this brochure. He stressed that this literature was a New Testament for him. He left his urban mode of living. He returned to countryside. He organized new rural life. So you can find so many ideologies of eco-village. I mentioned only some statistical comparison between Europe and Russia, but among eco-villages you can find some supporters of Megret theory of eco-villages, sometimes some orthodox eco-villages, sometimes atheist or some believers in some East religious cults. And interesting that it's so popular to organize eco villages around big cities or in special wonderful natural regions, like for example Altai region. It's South Siberia, mountain Siberia, with wonderful climate, with wonderful ecological resources. So I suppose this ecological village movement is very sophisticated movement, and the people who participate in this eco villages movement they inspired from very different ideological directions.
Yes, please.
Also, since you have mentioned.
Just one.
Hello, sir. Good afternoon.
Yes.
My name is Sudhanshu Ranjan. I am the student of Masters from CPS. So, you have mentioned that the Russian economy model is mostly concentrated on the extensive machineries that is used for the farming, and it also lead to the problem like the depopulation and the migration of person from the rural area to the urban area. And in terms of solution, you have mentioned that government of Russia has taken certain initiative to diversify the income strategy or to diversify the income ways of the people. But I would like to know in the particular the what step are being taken to diversify the income. For example, in India we are working on the horticulture, dairy farming, cooperative promotion. So what in actually Russian government is doing to diversify the income source in rural area for the people? Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Um, um, uh, Concerning diversification, not only income, but also diversification of agrarian production. Now we have a strong discussion in our agrarian policy, and critics of official agrarian policy in Russia stress that big agribusiness has so many resources for their development, and farmers doesn't have a lot of financial support. So, so-called political farmers lobby in Russia is so weak and is not able to struggle effectively against big agribusiness corporation. Um, uh, in Russian case, we can find, and I think it's the same story with India, the growth of so-called informal family activities. So spontaneously, many Russian common people try to optimize their family income using different opportunity for their labor. Partly they worked in the cities, partly in countryside, growing their own vegetables, fruits for self-consumption. And in this case, it might be a very useful idea of cooperatives, of co-ops for family economies that can help for many Russian families to grow and to sell to sell the harvest, for example, and to coordinate the facilities. But unfortunately, the cooperative idea is not popular in contemporary Russia. Russia was the leader in creating of cooperative, especially family cooperatives in cities, in countryside in the beginning of 20th century. And about this development was Chayanov theory of peasant cooperatives and agricultural cooperatives. But this idea was bureaucratized and discredited during Soviet collectivization, and as a result, in Soviet period, Russian agricultural cooperatives were very bureaucratic, and the main idea, the main aim was to maintain local bureaucracy, big enterprises, and so on and so on. And after that, the main problem for self-organization of in Russian countryside to development of this whole new cooperation and cooperatives. And I think the main problem for these we have a lot of forms of so-called informal cooperative activities among friends, among relatives, in countryside, in city, in some urban-rural family support, in changing of resources. But it's only some informal level. In our interview, we asked farmers about idea of strong cooperatives, strong solidarity between farmers, and who can help them to market-oriented economy. And farmer usually they answered yes, idea of cooperative is good idea, but we don't believe each other. We don't believe that it's possible to organize real effective market-oriented cooperative, and as a result we have only many informal cooperation between relatives and friends, between urban and rural areas, without strong cooperative ideology and movement in contemporary Russia.
Hello, Professor. Hello, Professor. Thanks for the enlightening session. My question is myself Muskan Kumar, and I'm a master's student in School of International Studies. My question is, how sustainable is Russia's rural agriculture model, counting the factor of climate change? And are there any serious problems Russia should be worried about in terms of sustainable agriculture model of development? And if there are problems that Russia should be worried about, do you have possible solutions or policy implications in your mind regarding that?
The last question, repeat please.
Regarding the sustainable agriculture model of Russia, how sustainable it is, counting the factor of climate change and global warming? And if there are problems, what are the possible solutions?
Yeah, I see. Yes, it's interesting question. Thank you. In post-Soviet period, Russian elites and Russian population think skeptically about the serious meaning of climate change. Or in many cases, people suppose that it's possible to find some profit from climate change because our territory, as a result, will be more warm, and it's possible to develop Russian sustainable agriculture in the North territories. In fact, it's very serious, very difficult question, and a lot of dangers and risks for Russian agriculture, for in a whole for Russia, in this dynamic of climate change. First of all, I mentioned about permafrost territories, and now many permafrost territories are. But firstly, again about some profits for Russia in processes of climate change. We have some special statistical mathematician models that demonstrate that in a whole, yes, it's global warming for our Russian northern territories, so-called non-Chernozem zone, provide some the growth of harvest. And our economists supposed that the climate change for Russia is more profitable, especially in some northern territories. But for me, it doesn't matter because northern territories now doesn't have at all labor power. So maybe it's useful for agriculture, but who are going to work on these territories? Because our villages, North villages, are so devastated. And the main limitation for Russian agriculture now is labor power. In many cases, we can see the process of migration. Some peasants from Central Asia, from Uzbekistan, first of all, from Kyrgyzstan, Tajikistan, not only in Russian cities, but also in Russian countryside. And now we made also some survey asking about this problem. It's very, again, unofficial, informal economy. In many cases, Russian government try to prevent this type of migration on the Russian territories, but now we can some new multinational revolution in many Russian North territories. So former Russian dwellers prefer to migrate into cities, and as a result, you can find a lot of new Korean, Uzbeks, Armenian farmers in former Russian villages. And maybe they will have some profit from this global warming on Russian territories. By the way, now in Russia, fantastic, especially in Moscow, is fantastic warm winter. The temperature in average is about 0 Celsius. So 0 Celsius it's very warm for Russia. And Moscow exists during 1.5 months without any snow. It's absolutely untypical situation, and we are waiting now. Maybe it will be very, very hot, warm season this year with some negative results for our agriculture. So, and you see, it's also effect of global warming. Concerning territory of permafrost, permafrost territory without strong frost may transformed into some new type of land, and as a result, it's the main problem for example, construction of building on these territories, especially of fundament of buildings. And many our engineers worried about negative effect of global warming for permafrost territories, and as a result, global warming destroyed roads, buildings on the north territories of Russia. But in a whole, many experts suppose that for agriculture, global warming is more positive than negative effects, especially for North territories, but not for South territories. South territory, of course, will have more problems with hot seasons. But again, the main problem, what to do with labor power in Russian countryside because of strong demographic crisis last decades.
Thank you, Professor. This is Nasir Hussain. I'm from Center for West Asian Studies, School of International Studies, JNU. It's the first time hands-on experience talking in front of a Russian professor. It was an insightful lecture. Thank you. Sir, I researched on Egypt. I thought I would get some inputs about Egypt because Egypt recently joined BRICS. But hopefully in coming sessions I'll get to know something about Egypt. Sir, I have some pinpointed questions. The first is population decline of Russia is huge, and I would like to know how it affected the workforce and the social structure of the Russia. The second question will be, sir, regarding identity. If we look from the lens of India, we are not able to distinguish between Russians and the Westerns. So what distinguishes you and the Westerns? I would love to know this. And third question will be regarding the social cohesion. As given the background that you are a sociologist, so it will be best to ask you about the social cohesion of the Russia. So, despite having regional disparities and ethnic conflict within the Russia, how they bound society together? What? Yeah, how will you define social cohesion with the context of the Russia? Thank you, sir.
Okay, so many questions. Interesting, interesting questions. I think what maybe the first question. Please repeat the composition of your question again.
You can maybe take some of the questions later also.
No, please.
First question regarding the decline of population in Russia and how it affected the workforce and the social structure of the Russia.
But that's the first question. Of course, it's very difficult, serious question, and I mentioned that now it's a serious deficit of working power, working class in many regions of Russia, and as a result, it's mass migration of workers, migrants from Central Asia, first of all, partly from republics of North Caucasus, but first of all from Central Asia republics. Of course, in the Soviet period, we had strong cultural connection with our republics, but in post-Soviet era, unfortunately, we can find some growth of xenophobia in Russia against migrants. It was funny and sad story. I returned from my field work by train to Central Railway Station in Moscow, and the conductor who opened the door of my train, he was very gloomy, and he exclaimed, "Welcome to Moscow, the capital of Tajikistan." So it's a typical example of this xenophobia. So now it's a real serious problem. I suppose that Russian government should maintain this migration because it's profitable for working from Central Asia. It's also very strong support for development of Russian economy. But we should remember about xenophobia, about nationalism, and also it's so popular idea to close the border of Russia to prevent the flooding of migration from Central Asia, and we can find a lot of political discussion in our TV, in our newspapers. So it's very painful question. But I don't see another opportunity. We should invite migrants for development of Russia, and also a lot of problems for migrants. For example, in Russian schools. It's not easy for migrants in Moscow, for example, to teach their child, their boys and girls, because of some restrictions against migrants. The second question.
Sir, second question related to the identity.
Oh, it's famous question. It's so many people love to talk again about our identities, about similarities between different nations, about contradictions, and how it's possible to predict some features of identity between Western nations, for example, Europe, and in the Russians. frankly speaking, I don't like to talk about it because I believe in enlightenment. I believe about positive idea of mankind, of all nations. Personally, I'm internationalist. Of course, it's possible to find so many differences between different regions inside India, inside Russia, between Europe and Russia, between Russia, China, and so on. But usually, it's a pleasure to find that finally, in spite of differences in our cuisine, in our language, in our tradition, we all are mankind. But well, I'll try. I'll try to describe some diversities. First of all, Western world is very different, and you can find so many diversities between England, France, German, East European countries, and sometimes it's also very discussable questions about diversities inside Europe. I think we have, first of all, diversities between different parts of European language families. For example, North Europe, so-called the area of German languages, South Europe, the area of Roman languages, East Europe, the area of Slavonic languages, and Ugro-Finn languages and nations. I don't know. Sometimes I have so many friends in the world, and their behavior is typical Russian behavior for me. Sometimes they are more Russians than many my Russian colleagues. So this is my answer. And the last question was
Egypt.
Social cohesion. What do you mean?
Despite having the ethnic conflict and the regional disparities, for example, urban and rural, for example, other conflicts are there. If you look at the international arena, the Ukraine and Russia conflict is there. So how Russia mobilized its population against, for example, US or the West, how social cohesion of the Russia works together?
You mean international conflicts? What
Internally or externally? Both internally, how do they maintain
Conflict within the country and how they mobilize the population against the enemies.
But again, you mean conflicts inside and outside concerning different nations? You mean?
Yes, for example, with Ukraine or with the West.
Yeah. Of course, it's exists some conservative discourse in Russian political culture. And some historical anecdotes about it. For example, I'll give you an example from Russia of 19th century, but this anecdote is very popular among many Russian contemporary modern conservators. Russian Tsar Alexander III loved to fish. And he spent a lot of his time fishing on the river near St. Petersburg. And he forgot about his meeting with Western diplomats and fishing, and his adjutants, his officer, visiting him on this river where he was as a fisherman, and reminded him, now the meeting with Western diplomats, and you are fishing now. And he answered, don't worry, Europe is made wait when Russian Tsar is fishing. And when this answer was among European diplomats, Western diplomats were very angry. And when this meeting was, finally, some European diplomat answered to Russian Tsar, Your Majesty, you risk to be alone without any alliance. And Russian Tsar answered, we have in this legend two variants of this answer of Russian Tsar. It was big table, the Russian tradition of toasts. And Russian Tsar reacted immediately. He answered, okay, in this case, I suggest a toast. The toast for only one alien of Russia, the small state Montenegro. It's very small state, but it's Slavonic state, and it was period the struggle between small Slavonic nations against Turkish. So it was, of course, joke because it's so small alliance, and but Montenegro country is also Orthodox country. But we have also another variant of his answer. Another variant was, in this case, I suppose the toast for two alliances of Russia. Russian army and Russian fleet. So it's a typical conservative reaction on any conflict that Russia has to be strong, first of all, militarist country that can prevent any conflicts inside and outside the country. Another also apocryph, another anecdote from Russian Tsardom, and sometimes it might be interesting in contemporary situation. Russian Tsar Nicholas I, he inspected new school book for geography, and he wrote his own description. What is Russia? He wrote on this book, Russia is not trade state. Russia is not industrial state, and Russia is not agrarian state. Russia is military state, and the aim of Russia to maintain the order in the old world. So it's, sometimes I think the United States about themselves may say the United States is trade state, industrial state, agrarian state, and the aim of the United States to maintain the order everywhere in the world. So it's possible to find different variants of this idea that the aim of the state, first of all, military state, to maintain strong order using army and fleet inside and outside the country. So it's, if you want, it's some strong conservative idea from Russian history. But of course, more leftist idea how to dissolve the conflicts in social conflicts and national conflict inside and outside, to use some international Marxist heritage from Soviet Union, to stress this idea of solidarity, poor nations, the idea how to combine different nations against imperialism in economic struggle and also in international struggle. Sometimes some leftist ideologists suggested to develop this Comintern idea in contemporary situation. For example, I suppose the most talented Russian writer, Zakhar Prilepin, he is leftist intellectual, and he tried that Russia should rethink this idea and to use this idea in new political and social situation in 21st century.
Thank you. There are other questions can we take, or I think we have to stop here and take my own presentation, and then we can continue in case you are so keen and interested, and I'm happy to know that. We can continue with the Q&A. After my presentation, you can ask questions to him as well as to me. All right. Is it fine? All right. So I will maybe take a cue from. It's working, I believe. All right. I will take a cue from the last point that Professor Nikulin was making, and your question about Russia's identity, where Russia belongs to. Yesterday, Professor Nikulin, in his remarks, said that there are two views about Russia's position or location, civilizationally and culturally speaking. One is that Russia is the most easterly of the Western civilization, the eastern flank of the Western civilization. The other is that Russia is the most Western among the Easterners, among the people of the East. But it clearly shows that the issue of Russia's identity is a complex one, and that there is something which makes Russia a combination of both East and West. Geographically speaking also, Russia straddles the entire Eurasia, Europe as well as Asia. Historically and civilizationally, its experience has been a mixed and complex one. If I may start by quoting one of the foremost authors of the 20th century, whose works you must have come across, that was Huntington. And Huntington says that Russia is a torn country, that Russia is divided between and among various historical cultural traditions, all of which have gone into the making of Russia. All right, Huntington says that Russia is not Western because the most defining phenomena and developments of Western civilization are absent from Russia's historical cultural experience. And what he means, he says he counts Roman Catholicism, feudalism, overseas expansion, commercial revolution, and more importantly, Renaissance, Reformation, Industrial Revolution, and Enlightenment. The idea of individual rights and democracy, he believes these are largely, if not entirely, missing from Russia's historical experience. Till the 16th and 17th, of course, the beginning of Russia, in the aftermath of Ukraine war, you heard so many discussions. You might have heard me also speaking, and many of you would know that the beginning of Russian civilization is traced to Kiev, which is the capital of present-day Ukraine. So Kievan Rus was a very prosperous, powerful, and large principality in the 10th, 11th century, and it was around that time in 988 that it adopted Orthodox Christianity. Now, Orthodox Christianity is, according to Huntington, and the Eastern Roman Empire, the Byzantine Empire, which was based in and around Constantinople, that, according to Huntington, is the first and most defining influence on Russian culture and civilization. Orthodoxy, Orthodox Christianity, and the Byzantine tradition. But by the 13th century, this empire or principality, which was quite large, Kievan Rus, there were internal dissensions, there were divisions, and sometimes in 1238, 1240, the Mongols, after the rise of Chinggis Khan, the Golden Horde was able to capture Russia. From 1238 to 1480, for almost 240 years, Russia was under the Mongol rule. And Huntington says that that is another very important influence on Russia. The Russians are a bit ambivalent about the Mongol legacy. They are not very comfortable about it. And there was a time in the 18th, 19th century and even 20th century, even now, where many Russians would say that all that is bad in Russia is because of that Mongol rule, the Tatar yoke. All right. If Russia is not more like Europe, it is because of the Mongol rule. It's another matter that Huntington and many others, for example, Karl Wittfogel, all right, Oriental despotism, and there are strands of thought within Russia who are called Eurasianists. I will speak about them only in a while. They believe that the Mongols also had a role to play in what Russia is today or in Russia's greatness. Karl Wittfogel, for example, would say, and even Huntington would say, that if Russia is known today, first and foremost, because it's a large, centralized state with military prowess. Now, this, according to some of the writers, is basically a Mongol legacy, a large, centralized, powerful state, able to control its own territories and its neighbors. So, therefore, the Mongol influence and the Mongol rule is one of the major influences on Russia. It's another matter that it's a very complex and debatable issue. If on the one hand, the many Russians would say that Mongol rule was very devastating for Mother Russia. It destroyed whatever was achieved during the Kievan period, Kievan Rus. But on the other hand, traditionally, the Europeans would say, I'm sorry, scratch a Russian, find a Tatar. All right, that
it's famous proverb, of course. Yeah.
Russia's Europeanness is only skin deep, epidermis only. Beneath the skin, they are basically Tatars. And when they call them Tatars, it's in a negative, pejorative sense, that they are, quote unquote, uncivilized barbarians. All right. Anyway, the fact is that till the 16th, 17th century, Russia was not really part of European civilization. Of course, Orthodox Christianity and many other impacts were there, but Europe was moving from 15th, 16th century onwards, Renaissance, Reformation, nation states, enlightened monarchy, commercial revolution, rise of city-states and a middle class, and then industrial revolution and enlightenment. Now, that was not taking place in Russia. But in the 17th century, after the time of troubles, once the Romanov dynasty came to power in Russia in 1613, the Russian rulers realized that Russia needs to be more like Europe in order to defend itself against Europe. So by the end of 17th century, Polish-Lithuanian Commonwealth and subsequently Sweden were major threats, existential threats for Russia. Can you imagine Russia being threatened by Poland and Sweden? I mean, the entire NATO, Russia can for some time at least stand up to them, militarily at least. But so the greatest Russian ruler, and some would say the father of modern Russia, Peter the Great, who ruled from 1682-83 till 1725, he traveled across Europe. He saw the developments in Europe. He brought back many technicians, engineers, and scholars from Europe and started a process of modernization, Europeanization, and westernization of Russia in order to make Russia like Europe, to withstand Europe. All right, he built a new capital, removed from Moscow to St. Petersburg. He started a new calendar, a new script, many new institutions. And also he tried to westernize his governance, his government structure, and even came out with a book of manners to tell his nobles. He cut their long beards, their loose clothing, made them to wear European clothes. All right, and all this was to make Russia at par with Europe. And this Europeanization and modernization of Russia continued under his successors, but the problem was that it was a top-down approach. The common people of Russia, there was a reaction from within Russia to this blind imitation of West of Europe. And this reaction came in the shape of Slavophile ideology, which became prominent almost 100 years after Peter's reforms, sometimes in 1830s and 40s. And the Slavophiles basically emphasized that Russia is not Europe and Russia need not be Europe. Russia has its own historical cultural experience. Russia has its own way of life. Russia has Orthodox Christianity against Europe's Catholicism and Protestant religions. Russia has its own traditional way of life, the Holy Rus. They had the concept of Third Rome. Third Rome, which believed that the first Rome, of course, is Rome proper, the seat and the headquarter of Roman Catholicism. The second Rome was in Constantinople, Istanbul, all right, under the Byzantines. And the third Rome, after the defeat of the Byzantines, the fall of Byzantium, 1453, at the hands of Ottoman Turks, the center of Orthodox Christianity and Slavic civilization shifted to Moscow and Petersburg. So, Moscow being the third Rome, many scholars believe that the concept and idea of Third Rome in before up to 19th century and in certain ways Third International in the 20th century, which they believe is a continuation of that idea that Russia has a role to fulfill, that Russia is like a Messiah. So that role of Russia, the Slavophiles also emphasized, and they believed that Russia's traditional village communes, way of life, which was based on harmony, on living together, not based on concept of individual rights or individuality that was already popular in Europe. So as against individualism, Russians had their conception of communal, social, harmonious way of life, where some of the problems that the Western man is facing, they said, for example, alienation, the Russians would not face. So they need to remain loyal to their tradition. Of course, the Slavophiles also emphasize the role and contribution of Russian emperor or the Tsar, who was a representative of Russian state. And of course, the fact that Russia has been invaded time and again by various, from Mongols to many others, later on, as I said, Polish-Lithuanian Commonwealth or Sweden, or still later on Napoleon, the French emperor, and in the 20th century by Nazi Germany. So Russians have this idea that order is most important. As against Western conception of rule of law, Putin, after coming to power, becoming president, talked about dictatorship of law. He said that order needs to be maintained. Social cohesion and harmony needs to be maintained. That is the first priority. And therefore, for us, liberal democracy is not our priority. We have our own historical cultural experience, and based on that, we will adopt and adapt democracy to our own needs and circumstances. So there is talk about sovereign democracy, which means where state is the central key figure, and state will maintain law and order, protect the individual, life and liberty or rights, but it is basically state-centric view. Now, this you can say, some would say, is a continuation of the political culture, pre-Soviet political culture, in which the Tsarist government, despite all the reforms that Peter and his successors brought about, Russia was wedded to a European model which was of the 17th and 18th century, where the monarch and the feudal system were the two core components of European polity. Monarchy, absolute monarchy, I mean enlightened or whatever, and feudalism. Now, that was the order, the ancien regime of Europe, the pre-French Revolution ancien regime, traditional feudal monarchical system that Russia was wedded to. Now, after French Revolution, Napoleonic Wars, the revolutions of 1830 and 1848, Europe was changing. The idea of a limited government, constitutional government, legislative assemblies, individual rights, Bill of Rights. I mean, you remember the 1688 Glorious Revolution and 1689 Bill of Rights, and subsequently the French Revolution and another set of rights, the American Revolution and yet another statement of individual rights. Now, so Europe was moving towards a more a government where the common people were increasingly playing a role. Russia was not willing to move. So another very apt statement about Russia is by one Western scholar, Ivor Newman, who says that Russia spent the 18th century imitating Europe, becoming like Europe. So Peter the Great and his successors, especially Catherine the Great, she ruled in the last decades of 18th century, so, and who was very influenced by the French Enlightenment. So Russia spent the 18th century becoming like Europe, but spent the 19th century defending Europe of the 18th century while Europe itself was changing. All right, with all these revolutions and demand for popular participation and elected assemblies and constitutional monarchies and a limited government, Europe was changing, Russia was not. Russia was wedded to an older model of Europe. And then he goes on to say, in the 20th century, Russia adopted a European socialist model which Europe never adopted. So Marx wrote about when he conceptualized a socialist revolution, it was mainly with Germany or England in mind, fully developed capitalist societies. But these societies never experienced or went through socialist revolution, which Russia did, which was not a developed capitalist country, industrialized society. It was halfway between feudalism and agrarian society and capitalism of the European type. So Newman says that Russia adopted a European socialist model in 20th century, which Europe never did. So that's the complexity of Russia's relations with Europe. In the 20th century, in fact, after the Bolshevik Revolution, some of the Russian migrants who had left Russia because of this revolution, they started a new movement, and which has since, in the last 100 years, has become very influential in Russia, whether it comes to Russia's domestic politics or its external policy, and they are called Eurasianists. Exactly. So, Eurasianists who believe that Russia is neither Europe nor Asia, neither Orient nor Occident. Russia is distinct from both, although Russia shares something with both. So, it's like a bridge between Europe and Asia. It has commonalities with both, but at the same time, it is unique and distinct from both. All right. Now, despite all this Europeanization and Westernization of Russia, as I said, within Russia, among the common people, the Russian of China, there was they were still wedded to the traditional way of life of Russia or the idea of Holy Rus. All right. So there was a disjuncture, there was a rupture between the Russian ruling elite and the common people. There were many movements. The Slavophiles influenced the Narodnik movement in Russia, who talked about these peasant communes, who talked about Russia's traditional way of life, and they had in mind the welfare of the common Russian. But the westernizing elite, the problem for the westernizing elite was that despite all the Europeanization and westernization of Russia, there were instances, times when the Europeans showed that they were not willing to accept Russia as one of their own. So I can quote one example from writings of Rudyard Kipling, where he cites this instance, this anecdote of a Russian deserter, a deserter from Russian army, sometimes in the mid 19th century, coming to India and meeting some soldiers and officers of the British East India Company army. And I quoted Huntington. I can quote another writer, another very influential writer, and then move on, Edward Said. So Edward Said says that in his Orientalism, he says that Orientalism was constructed by Europe sometimes in the 18th century, starting with Spanish, Portuguese, the French and the English, all right, in order to define themselves vis-a-vis, in opposition to, in juxtaposition to the Asia or Orient. But it was not so simple. There was an objective. The objective was to dominate, to exploit the Orient, the riches of the Orient. So it was a European project. Now, Said says, as far as, its attitude towards Orient or Asia is concerned, Said, Russia is not very different from Europe. All right. So during the heyday of, the idea, the concept of civilizing mission of the Europeans, white man's burden, Russia joined that project. It's another matter, not just Russia, many others. The Japanese joined it sometimes in the 20th century. All right. So this deserter, when he comes to India and meets the officers of the British Indian Army, he says that, well, you are doing a very good job here in India, civilizing these uncivilized barbarians. We are doing something similar in Central Asia. This is one anecdote. I'm not saying this is the only conception of East that Russians had. No. So, and the British reacted. He was amused. He was not very happy. He said the Russian was a jolly good fellow. It's all right. But then when he tucks in his shirt and tries to pose as a European, he becomes a racial anomaly, because the British would not accept the Russian as one of the Europeans. Now that has been one of the fundamental issues between Europe and Asia. And the Russians have reacted in so many ways against this type of condescending attitude, or the inability of Europe or the West, collective West, to recognize Russia. What are some of these reactions? One was, of course, the Slavophile reaction, in which they would emphasize Russia's own traditional way of life and past. All right. There was a small group of Russians who, frustrated with Europe by the end of 19th century, they started talking about uniting with the Asians, with the Orientals, with Persians, with Chinese, with Indians to oppose the Western imperialism. Was thought sticky? Yeah. All right. So after that, in the 20, and these were, of course, these were not very influential or not very popular ideologies, but they were there. The Easterners who believed that Russia should rather join Asia in opposing the West. All right. And then came the Eurasianists who saw Russia as a bridge between Asia and Europe, and who wanted Russia to play a role in mediating between the two and in showing the path. I mean, they believe that Russia can play the role of a messiah, can, show the path to both the East and the West. All right. So these are various conceptions about Russia among Russians and among the Westerners, and which partially explain the problems between Russia and Europe. I will say something about 5-7 minutes about how Indians and India sees. At the beginning, and that I don't know whether we have time for that. We do have time, but I'm afraid you might be tired or hungry. But let me see, at least 15 minutes, if not more, before we start the Q&A. So, how Indians see and perceive Russia can be best captured by two statements. One made by the first Prime Minister and the other made by the present Prime Minister. The first Prime Minister, after his visit to Russia in 1927, after 10 years of the Bolshevik Revolution, when Nehru came back, and he, of course, had a mixed feeling about Russia. He was largely appreciative of Russia, but he says that Russia is perceived in two ways: with fear and awe by some, he meant the Europeans, and with some hope by many of the Asian countries and Asian people who were struggling against European colonialism and imperialism. And the Bolsheviks adopted a policy of supporting the national liberation struggles, although there were many debates about it. What type of support? You must be knowing how M.N. Roy challenged Lenin in the Third International in 1920. Lenin wanted to support the Indian freedom movement, national struggle, or for that matter, all national struggles, which were anti-imperialist and anti-colonial. At that point in time, he believed these struggles were progressive. But M.N. Roy said that many of these struggles are bourgeois-led, and they are prone to compromise with their colonial masters and the bourgeoisie. And when Chauri Chaura happened and the non-cooperation movement was withdrawn, M.N. Roy said, "See what I told you." And of course, Lenin partially revised his position and said that we will support only those national struggles which are progressive, which give scope to socialist and communist movements and ideologies. Anyway, but India had, the influence of Soviet Revolution, and before that the 1905 revolution on Indian freedom struggle was multifaceted. It's not just Nehru. There was Subhash Chandra Bose, who also traveled to Soviet Union. And don't forget that at Haripura in 1937-38, it was Subhash Bose who adopted state planning as a Congress plan of action. And similarly, there were many other resolutions during Congress sessions which reflected, starting from the 1931 and the Lahore session. After that, Lahore session and then 1931, there were many sessions in which a socialist vision, socialistic if not socialist, and don't forget that it's not just Congress. I mean, there was Congress Socialist Party, which was created in 1934. The Hindustan Republican Army was converted into Hindustan Socialist Republican Army. All right. So the influence of socialist ideas on Indian revolutionaries, on Indian National Congress, and various shades of political ideologies can be seen. After the, of course, this support for national freedom struggles, after the end of Second World War, there was a time during which this was the time of tight bipolarity, Zhdanov thesis, during which the Stalinist government in Russia, they were not very enthused by India's independence. They famously, it was called, India was, and the Congress leadership was called running dogs of European imperialism, British imperialism, clinging to the apron strings of their former colonial masters. So they did not consider India's Independence Day, I mean Stalin and his government, as very genuine. It's another matter that within, and Stalin did not give audience to the first Indian ambassador to Soviet Union, Pandit Nehru, I mean Vijay Lakshmi Pandit, Nehru's sister. Of course, Radhakrishnan, second ambassador, could get an audience. But subsequently, there was a change in the Soviet ideological position after Stalin's death in 1953 and Khrushchev's reforms. And when they talked about peaceful coexistence, they talked about a vast zone of peace which has emerged, which was neither following the Western capitalist model nor maybe the socialist model, but at the same time they were adopting many progressive domestic policies like Zamindari Abolition or Sealing Act or the White Revolution in Iran. So they became largely supportive of these newly independent countries, which were initially not seen very positively by the Stalin government. And in 1955, you know how Nehru traveled to Russia, the Russian Soviet Union, Soviet leaders, Nikita Khrushchev and Bulganin came to India, and that laid this is 70th year of that cooperation. Bhilai, Bokaro, Bhel, Hindustan Aeronautics Limited, Digboy. I mean, one can go on, and there are statistics to show how much of oil production, how much of electricity generation is with and because of Soviet and Russian help. All right. So, and the Soviet help came, I mean, the European countries were not willing to extend that type of help that the Soviets did. So that laid the foundation. So India's perception about Soviet Union, and of course, this material help is not the only one. I told you about the ideological and the ideational foundations of Indo-Soviet friendship, the meeting of minds, and a worldview which was very different and distinct from the Western, capitalist, liberal, whatever. Of course, when India adopted non-alignment as its foreign policy strategy, motto, idea, both Soviets and the British criticized, and the Western countries criticized, but very shortly. The Soviets revised their opinion about non-alignment, calling the non-aligned countries as genuinely progressive, non-aligned, wishing to follow their own autonomous, independent path, domestically as well as externally. The Soviets came to recognize the importance of non-alignment. The Western countries took much longer and perhaps never did. So the foundation, this is how Indians perceive Russia. In my childhood, Prime Minister, the current Prime Minister, during his first meeting with Putin in 2014. Just 2014, by the way, in many ways was a turning point. It was a turning point because a new government dispensation came to power in India. It was a turning point also because the Crimea, re-annexation, annexation, whatever you call it, took place. And that was a turning point for India and in many ways for the world. So Prime Minister Modi said that every child in India knows that Russia is our best friend. So that captures the essence of India-Russia relations, about India's perception about Russia. And final point, I said 15 minutes, I still have 2 minutes. And after that, Q&A and then tea. Unless you want to meet again. And I'm ready and willing, always. So, there is something more fundamental also, apart from what we have already discussed, which is that all said, both India and Russia and many other countries, global south, we all are non-Western. All right. And the way West defines its political, economic, ideological, whatever goals may not be the same for us. And the Russian president, in that sense, was very clear. Putin, in some of his statements and pronouncements, said there can be no universal models of democracy. All right. Democracy has to be adapted and adopted to the conditions of each society. And each society has the sovereign right to decide its political future, to adapt and adopt democracy or whatever form of polity it wants to. There can be no US or UK model of democracy. There can be no imposition of democracy from above. There can be no intervention in the internal affairs of countries in the name of humanitarian intervention. Now, these ideas of territoriality, of territorial integrity, of sovereignty, many of the countries of global south are still wedded to these ideas. All right. And our worldview or our understanding of the current situation or current problems, whatever might be Trump's understanding of the global problems and concerns, the countries of the global south are more concerned about food security, energy security, environmental security, human security, and many such other issues that Mr. Trump or the collective West, I'm afraid, is not willing to understand and appreciate. Thank you very much.